Welcome, folks, to this week's actually second edition of Tech Sales Advice. I am, of course, your host, Chris White, and this is the LinkedIn Live program for pre-sales professionals and pre-sales leaders. And these are live conversations, folks, as I like to say, unscripted, unrehearsed, and unpredictable. And I'm particularly, I'm always delighted with my guests. I have such great guests, but I'm particularly excited for today's guest. She and I met a few months ago. Gosh, it's been about 4 months already. That's crazy to
Yeah.
me. She and I met in person. I had the opportunity to actually speak at their kickoff earlier this year, and I was really impressed with this particular, I'm going to say young lady, because you're at least 20 years younger than me, so I think I can get away with that. But what so impressed me, and the reason she's been invited to join us today, is she spent 4 years as an implementation manager, and she said, Chris, I never thought I'd be in sales, and now here she is. She's in a sales role, and she loves what she does. And I'm probably going to put words in her mouth, but I'm guessing she probably can't even imagine any other profession. Although I have a feeling great things are in store for her. Our guest today is Natalie Mayo. She's a senior sales engineer with Datto, a Kaseya company. And we're going to talk about her journey into pre-sales. And frankly, we don't have enough women in pre-sales, and I think we need more younger people, early talent, as some organizations call them. So, Natalie, I'm delighted to welcome you today.
Thank
Thank you so
you.
much for being here. How are you doing?
Doing well. Thanks so much for having me. Super excited.
Well, and by the way, I think you're the fourth guest from your organization. So there's sort of a there's sort of a
A
streak running.
trend. Yeah.
Indeed, indeed. So and by the way, folks, we don't necessarily see those of you who are out there. So if you do have any questions for Natalie or for myself, please feel free to ask. So Natalie, I introduced you briefly, but
Mhm.
could I invite you to maybe introduce yourself a little bit more broadly? What was your background, and sort of how did you find your way into this role that you never thought you'd
Sure.
have?
Yeah. So absolutely. As you mentioned, I spent about 4 years in implementation in a post-sales role. Prior to that, I actually was in support. So I've been on, both sides, right? In terms of the career journey, I went to school and I majored in media studies, which is kind of a not a
Mm.
super, specific degree. And I've always been really interested in the what makes people tick, right? Their
Hmm.
personalities, reading people. That's always fascinated me. I started off in marketing and PR internships. Wasn't a huge fan, putting press kits together, and it just wasn't my thing.
Hmm. Yeah.
So I never, really had a sense of strong career direction. Um, After college, I landed a job in support at a home automation company that is
Okay.
now owned by Will.i.am. It's called Wink. Used to be sold at Home Depot. So that's sort of where I, started in terms of the tech space and moved to Autotask PSA in a support role, moved to implementation, and eventually landed as a sales engineer. Yeah.
Now, how did you first did somebody reach out to you and say,
Yeah.
Natalie, I think you'd be a good sales engineer? Talk a little bit about that
Sure.
story and that experience.
Absolutely. So yes, Shane Matson, great friend, former colleague, actually reached out and said, "Hey, out of nowhere, I hadn't spoken to him in a while, and he texted me and he said, 'Would you be interested in being an SE?'" And I was like, "Yeah, sure." And so I just kind of walked into that role, and it's been amazing. It's my favorite job that I've ever had. I love my work. I love my job. It's great.
First of all, isn't it amazing to be able to say that? There are
Yes.
so many people. There's so many people that don't wake up and say what you just said, right?
Mm,
So the
yeah.
idea that we can wake up and say, "Man, I love," not that it's not difficult, right?
Hmm. Oh
Not that
yeah.
there aren't challenges, but to be able to wake up and say, "Man, I love my job." But by
Right.
the way, Natalie, there's already a comment. Chandler Fulton says the topic already resonates with me because it
Good friend
feels
of mine. Yeah.
journey. Very, very, very good. Well, Chandler, nice to see you. Appreciate your comment. Talk a little more about what it is that you love so much
Yeah,
about this profession.
absolutely. So I think the psychological aspect, like it's no secret
Mm,
that sales is really kind of a psychology game, right?
mm,
And I think I never thought that I would be in sales because I had this notion that one had to be very competitive and one had to be
mm,
almost cutthroat. That is not the case at all. So I've learned a lot,
mm,
in my time as an SE. I love the thrill of kind of the adrenaline rush that you get when you're starting out a demo and you're
mm,
doing the discovery, and you have about maybe 30 seconds to a minute to try to classify someone in terms of their personality and then tailor
mm,
the demo to them, match their tone, their energy, anticipate what they'll want to see. I love that. I get a kick out of it. And
mm,
the sweet feeling of winning as a team, like that's huge. I
mm.
love the shout outs. I love, lifting people up. It's just fun. Yeah.
It's interesting. It's really interesting that you said that you're sort of reading the person, because we talk so much about customizing, quote unquote, customizing the demo
Sure.
based on their business, their needs,
Right.
their situation, what they're trying to accomplish. But the fact that you said I customize the quote unquote customize the demo in real time,
Mhm.
based more on who this individual is, their
Right.
personality, their energy level, their tone of voice. I think
Right.
there's so much to be said. So what's an example? What's an example of something that you might sort of sense or read early
Yeah.
in the conversation, and how might that change how you deliver the message?
Definitely. So obviously, discovery is incredibly important, right? Having that and tailoring the demo from a technical perspective.
Yeah.
But beyond that, I think it's important to note how quickly or slowly someone is speaking, right? Sometimes it's a regional thing, right? I talk fast naturally. I've been told that. So kind of slowing that down. Also, if someone seems immediately disinterested, I
Mm,
tend to lean almost less enthusiastic as I'm showing off the platform, um, in a way to kind of match their energy. And sometimes I find that works. Or if one is incredibly direct, right? And they're like, well, let's just get to the point. Boom, 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 boom.
mm.
And then if somebody's kind of like, friendly, super laid back and chill, like I'll pop in a couple jokes. It's really similar to just getting to know people and trying to make them like you in a really short frame of time, which is hard. It doesn't always work, but
It's really an insightful observation. As you well know, I give a lot of talks and run workshops, and I often talk about quote customizing the message, customizing the demo
Mhm.
based on their situation, their
Sure.
business, but I think there's a valuable lesson to be learned here, which is we also need to be tuned into their energy level, their tone of
Right.
voice, their
Right.
level of interest, et cetera, and govern or modify the approach. It's interesting. I'm gonna send you a link to a podcast. I literally
Yeah.
just listened to a podcast yesterday.
Awesome.
I think I do some work with a company called Aslan, and there's a
Yeah.
podcast, Sales with Aslan, and those they interviewed a gentleman. His name is Dan. I don't, but he talked about the four personality types
Hmm.
as it relates to birds, and he said
Hmm.
there's the eagle.
Okay.
And if you're dealing with an eagle, that means they're strong personality and they just want
Right.
to dive in and get right to it.
Sure.
There's the parrot who does a lot of talking, right?
Yep. Yep.
There's the dove,
Yep.
and the dove is concerned about the team and the group,
Hmm.
and then I actually didn't even get to the fourth. So any event, but what you're
Yeah.
saying is perfectly in line with that. So that's
Awesome.
fantastic.
Yeah. I'm looking
You
forward to hearing that. Yeah.
you mentioned win as a team.
Hmm.
And I want to pick that apart a little bit because,
Yes.
as you may recall, habit number one in my 6 habits is to partner with our sales counterparts. And
Yes.
so I think, uh, and I believe that quote sales is a team sport.
Hmm.
So talk about what have you learned about interacting with your sales counterparts?
Yeah.
What specific things have you done to build effective relationships,
Relationships.
et cetera?
Yeah, sure. So when I started as an SE, I had the tendency to kind of like over explain everything coming from
Mm.
that post sale role. Did a couple shaky demos, very nervous. When I started to kind of find my pace, whenever I kind of got a compliment from, one of the sales reps I was working with, I would say, hey, feel free to ping my manager, who's still my manager, Jason Berg. Amazing, great guy. And I think that reputation is a really big thing in sales. And
Mm.
it's a little bit, I think, against my nature inherently to sort of, you know, put myself out like that, but it does help, right? So one, building that reputation. Two, sales enablement is a huge part of sales engineering, right? And pre-sales in
Mm.
general. So identifying needs for additional training, coming up with content to present. Chris Mabry, who we both know quite well, has this concept of SE Corner, which we've all sort of iterated on, meeting with
Mm.
sales teams on a weekly basis or monthly basis, depending on their schedule, and then
Yeah.
presenting product updates and asking, what can we help you with? Meeting with regional sales managers to kind of align on who might be struggling with the team, right? And those relationships are sort of naturally built over time, but those are some kind of actionable things that one who is newer in pre-sales, right, or to a company could do.
Yeah, yeah, that's really good. As you were speaking, one of the thoughts that came to mind is you seem so comfortable
Mhm.
just in front of a camera. You seem so comfortable. Is this something that you have developed over the years? Have you always just been just naturally good, quote, in front of an audience or in front of
No,
people?
I don't think so. I think when I was a young child, I was definitely like an attention seeker. I loved getting
Mm.
attention, like most kids do, right? And then that awkward stage in high school, I was incredibly shy. Didn't
Hmm.
even like to participate in class, like red face, all the whole thing. I do think that I've developed over the years, probably mostly through implementation, the ability to fake
Hmm.
it till you make it, or like, think on the fly, right?
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
no, it doesn't. I think now it comes naturally to me, but I don't think it always has. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Are there other lessons or other things that you learned as an implementation manager? Because it sounds
Mm-hmm.
like one of the things that you learned as an implementation manager is dealing with customers, thinking on your
Mm-hmm.
feet a little bit. Or
Yes.
as you reflect on that part of your career, are there other parts of that role that prepared you or helped you for the role as a sales engineer?
Absolutely. I think the kind of a deep sort of technical understanding of the product
Mm.
makes for a good demo. And it also, conversely, can make it difficult to give a good demo if you're diving into
Mm.
too much detail. You talk about the concept of a minimum viable demo, right? Which I'm still trying to perfect there. But
Mm.
I do think that knowing the way from a post sale perspective, knowing how a product is meant to be built out and implemented and used, and the common not struggles but maybe things that our partners come up against,
Yeah.
you can almost like reference those in a way where it's not completely obvious, and also speak to the value of the tools that we're presenting because you've seen them in action, if that makes
Yeah.
sense.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. You know what? I think here's the irony is that it works being in a role such as an implementation manager, and you may recall I was a consultant. I was a consultant for
Hmm.
almost 15 years
Wow. Yeah.
before I got into pre-sales.
Wow.
And you're right, it works both for and against you. It works
Mm-hmm.
for you in that you have quote unquote real life experience
Sure.
working with that solution in the field, and and you understand the people that
Right.
you're now selling to.
Correct.
On the flip side, to your point, it's natural for us. The first handful of demos, or maybe even the first 20 demos, we tend to fall back into
Yeah.
consulting mode, training mode, implementation
Right.
mode, as
Right.
opposed to a true sales demonstration. So
Exactly.
that's it. There's a few comments.
Oh,
Nicole.
Nicole, she's awesome. Oh, we used to work side by side. She's now a senior manager of implementation services. Yeah, she's great. Excellent.
Well, Nicole is giving you some props. Nicole, thank you for
Thanks,
sharing.
Nicole.
And Chandler says, coming from technical support, yes, having that
Absolutely.
strong technical foundation, indeed, invaluable.
Yeah.
So, I want to dig a little deeper into this.
Sure.
So you were an implementation manager.
Hmm.
You were invited to get in, say it. You were invited to at least consider a job as a sales engineer. You never thought you'd be in sales.
No.
And so when you made that transition, what were some of the early lessons that helped
Yeah.
you transition from that post sales role to a pre-sales sales engineer role?
Good question. So a couple of them, there's a book called Great Demo by Peter
Hmm.
Kohan, and it's
Know it well.
begin with the end in mind, right? So show the value, right? Don't show every single bell and whistle. Note that prospects are looking for a solution to their problems. They're not looking for the minutia unless they ask. I also had incredible mentors, Shane Matson, Sarah Zorica, who were, in pre-sales at Datto,
Yeah.
and leadership, Dan Knight, Jason Berg, Chris Mabry, all have really helped. So I think that just sort of thinking about the product and stripping it down to, if I knew nothing about it, what would be
Mm,
most appealing, or taking the problems that I understood so well from my post sale, um, part of my career, that has helped me sort of develop scenarios that I'll use in my demos. So I'll say, oh, do you do this? Or if you do, how do you do this? Or if you're doing it this way, blah, 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 that kind of thing. Yeah.
that's great. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's great. Well, and I think there's an important point there, and that is we are continuously getting better. I think for a lot of
Right.
people, if this job is difficult for virtually everyone who first enters pre-sales.
Hmm.
You're going to make a lot of you're going to make mistakes,
Oh, yeah.
and unfortunately, those mistakes are made in front of people. Like
Exactly.
we don't make mistakes sort of in the back office, so to speak, right?
Hmm.
Like our mistakes are on public view,
All
and,
exposed. Yeah.
right. And I think there's such an important lesson there, which is and I tell this to lots of people. You have to go through being bad at this
Hmm.
before you can become good at this. And if you don't
Absolutely.
have that grit, if you don't have that endurance and the mental strength to deal with some of the lumps that are coming,
Hmm.
then it's but the learning never ends. And
Yeah.
that's what I love. I mean, look, Natalie, I've been doing this a long time, and full transparency, I ran a workshop 2 days ago, and I made a
Hmm.
mistake when I first started sharing the Zoom, right? And so
Hmm. Hmm.
it still happens. Were
Yeah.
you surprised? Because here you are, you're an implementation manager, you're thinking, I'll never be in sales. Were you
Hmm.
surprised that you actually discovered that you liked this role?
Um, yes, I was surprised at how much I liked it. I was
Mm,
surprised at how natural it felt. I was surprised at how valued I felt. Um,
mm,
I think that, implementation, it's great. It's an incredibly difficult job, and it's easy to get burnt out. The thing that surprised me most when I broke into pre-sales was how gratifying it was. It's kind of like
mm,
that instant gratification almost, and closing a deal. Having a rep message me and say, "Hey, we closed, this company." It's an amazing feeling, because that partnership and those relationships that I think I've grown with, the teams that I'm aligned to, they're really special, and coworkers
mm,
become like friends. We celebrate wins together, and we kind of like
mm.
mourn those losses together, right? It's not to be too dramatic, but I think the most surprising thing was just how it didn't feel like work. It felt like fun. Of course it's work, right? And there's things that
Of
are,
course.
yeah, but
Yeah, I mean, you're so spot on, and I do think for those of us with the right combination of skills and talents, when we quote fall into or finally discover this role, you're right,
Mhm.
it just absolutely clicks. As you think about where you are right now in your journey, if I can use that term,
Sure.
and you've been a sales engineer, what, about 2 year, 2.5 years, something like
About
that?
2 years. Yes.
Okay. Yeah. So, look, I've had, I saw on LinkedIn lots of people were talking about how wonderful you are. So clearly, you have made an impression on your colleagues, and you've done well. But we're always learning, and we're always improving, and we're always developing. Are there quote parts of your game, so to speak, or there are areas that for you yourself you're trying to be intentional about either improving or developing? So
Mhm.
what are some of those areas?
Absolutely. One of the things that I'm trying to improve upon is getting better at the work-life balance. Now, this is self-imposed,
Mm,
I'll say that. So one of the, I guess, side effects of loving your job so much, right, and kind of throwing yourself in is that sometimes when you get home, work is on your mind and you want to talk about
mm,
it. So I want to,
mm,
that's something I'm working on. And I think we all are, regardless of field, the field that we're in. The other thing is still just that natural inclination. I still have remnants of it to over explain and show this really cool feature because if I don't show it, then they're not going to know about it, you
mm,
know? And that's not always effective, right?
yeah.
So pulling back a bit in the way of detail is to this
Mm,
day, right?
mm.
Something that I am continuing to work on. Yeah.
I wish I could tell you that feeling or that challenge will go away, but I'm not sure. I'm not sure
It's
it will. I
forever
mean,
there.
it's
Yeah.
even now for me, I no longer give demos, and
Hmm.
but the workshops that I run, many of which are online, are a
Right.
lot like giving a demo. And
Right.
so, just like those of you, yourself and others
Hmm.
out in the field giving demos, what do? I prepare for my workshops. I
Yep.
show up with all of my material and all my slides, and there are times when I find myself needing to rein myself back in a little on some of the ideas that I want to share. So
Sure.
I'm not sure. I'm not sure that ever goes away.
Yeah.
Comment from I hope I'm saying it. Arun, do you know Arun, or is he,
Um,
maybe
Arun?
he's a guest
Sure.
who just found it? What's
Yeah,
that?
yeah. I don't know him personally, no.
Yeah,
But hey, Arun, how are you?
pre-sales roles always find us. That is so
Mm,
true, Arun, in
yeah,
experience. Yeah,
definitely.
that's so true.
Absolutely.
That is so true. So, what else about this profession have you sort of discovered along the way that maybe were areas that you had to specifically develop or work
Mm,
on, or weren't as obvious to you? Because it's such it's an up and down journey.
mhm.
Are there certain sort of maybe peaks and valleys that you've experienced
Yes.
where you think you've got it all figured out, and then you realize, oh, okay, I overlooked
Yes.
that part of it, and then okay, now I think I've got it all figured out, and then you get into another demo, it's like, okay, I didn't really think about that part. So
Mhm.
have you had some of those peaks and valleys?
Absolutely, absolutely, and I think that I like to learn, right? I hate being stagnant, and that's one of the reasons why I
Mm,
love this role so much. Our company has a lot of, companies in the portfolio, which is great. One of the like, I guess, peaks and valleys, as you say, saying something that's technically incorrect, but not realizing it. Something minor,
mm,
right? But then after the fact, right, somebody on the implementation side could say, "Hey, that's actually not how it goes." I
mm,
feel incredible guilt. Not that happens
mm,
a lot, Nicole. Sorry. Um, but I think all of us just sometimes unintentionally make those mistakes, and that definitely can hit hard because there's
mm,
guilt around that.
mm,
Also, going into a demo, feeling like you're prepared and, it's not the technology that's difficult to present, but maybe the reaction from the
mm,
prospect just isn't positive. And
mm,
whatever you say, however you try to match their tone, being sort of shut down. Now that's rare, right? But when it happens, I'm kind of like a sort of a, I guess, a sensitive person, right? It
Mm,
hurts, that
yeah,
bugs me a bit.
yeah,
Peaks, definitely there are some days where, great collaboration with the other colleagues, just a lot of great demos, and you end the day feeling like you're on a high, right?
yeah,
Um, so yeah.
yeah. You said a few things that triggered some thoughts for me. One of them, I was probably in this profession for a couple years,
Hmm.
and and I think you've heard some of my story.
Sure.
When I first got into the role, I thought I was going to be brilliant because I could move a mouse and talk at the same time, right?
Yeah.
And I found out very quickly there's more to this profession
Hmm.
than just being good in front of an audience. And as I've shared, I probably shared in the talk that I did for your team, I made a
Yeah.
lot of mistakes when I first entered the role, and I figured things out. And I really sort of hit my stride. And there was a stretch of time, probably 6 months or so, where it almost felt like I didn't have a single bad meeting. Like I
Mm.
just felt like I was. It's like
Yeah.
everything that was crossing my plate, I was like hitting it out of the park. And then I
Right.
remember I had this one meeting, and it might have been. I mean, it was a long time ago, and it was. I think
Yeah.
it was a web meeting.
Yeah.
And to your point, it just didn't go well.
Yeah.
Nothing that I did wrong necessarily. It was nothing that
Right.
I did different. I followed my process. I
Hmm.
followed, and for whatever reason, I didn't click with this group. I'm not sure I
Yes.
clicked on a personal level. I
Right.
think they just weren't impressed with the solution,
Right.
and I was so hard on myself.
Yeah.
And to your point, I really took it personally. And I remember I had a colleague call
Absolutely.
me afterwards, and she just simply said, Chris, you were great. It just, for whatever reason, they weren't impressed and it didn't click. And that's okay. Like, Chris,
Right.
we're not going to bat 1,000. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
and,
Yeah.
and I think I even wrote this in the book. Like, look,
Yeah.
I mean, in most cases, that's not the kid, to your point. But sometimes just
Yeah.
the chemistry isn't right. They're just not going to be
Right.
impressed. And we have to be at peace with the fact that we're not going to
Exactly.
bat 1,000 in this profession. So
Absolutely.
and we have to develop a little bit of a thick skin at
Hmm.
times,
100%. Yeah.
right?
And I think part of being a successful sales engineer is loving your product, right? That's a huge part of it.
Mm,
So when you love your product so much, and then, it's almost like you have your own ego, and then like you have an ego attached to the product, if that makes any sense at all.
yeah,
When it's not impressive, or when it's sort of to a prospect, that can be taken personally. So that thick skin, you definitely need to develop that. That's completely correct. And yeah, just not letting that sort of negativity stick with you,
yeah,
knowing that you can't win them all, right?
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And to your point, I mean, I'll even take that a step further. We have to be okay, and we have to be at
Hmm.
peace with the fact not everybody's going to be impressed with your solution, and
Exactly.
that's okay. Right?
Right.
It takes a little bit of time to get used to that, right? It
Yeah.
takes a little bit, you
Right.
you got to be able to swallow that pill, so to speak. But it actually makes us better as sales professionals if we come to peace with the fact that, look, this our solution actually isn't the perfect ideal
For
solution for
everyone.
everyone, right?
Hmm.
And so the more we recognize and realize that, I think the more at peace we can be with that. What would you say has been the most difficult or painful lesson to learn in the past couple years
Ooh,
that you've been
that's a
doing
tough
this?
one. Difficult or painful lesson. Got to think about that one for a while. That's a good question. I think that probably giving myself, one lesson that I learned is that I need to give myself space in between demos. I need to give myself
Mm,
breaks. I need to not, work through lunch. And that's not imposed again by anyone but myself.
mhm.
I've always been a hard worker to an extreme sometimes. And I think that learning, that's kind of a painful lesson when you find that you're getting potentially burnt out, and your demos might suffer because you don't have enough time to prepare, or
Mm,
the vibe's just not totally correct.
mhm.
And that's a big thing.
Yeah,
As much as you love something, and as much as you want to be utilized, because that's an important metric, being an SE, you have to take a step back. And I'm still learning that, right?
yeah,
um, So I would say that's probably a big one for me. Yeah.
Yeah. I think that, I mean, that really triggers me because
Mm.
because I still suffer from that from time to time, and it comes from a good place usually, right?
Right.
We don't like to say no.
Right.
We like being, quote, the rock star. We like,
Yep.
and we want to believe that we can handle anything. Just
Yes.
pile it on, and I can do it. But
Right.
you're right. I think there's a term called the of diminishing returns. I mean, at some
Mm-hmm.
point, we do need to take time for ourselves,
Mm-hmm.
whether that's you mentioned even breaking for lunch, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
We need to recognize that we are still human. We are
Right.
not super we are not superhuman
Superheroes.
individuals, even though we
Yeah.
think we are, and or
Right.
we want to believe we are. And you're right. We need to pace ourselves. So
Right.
I
Absolutely.
think that's a very valuable lesson. Natalie, let me push our pause button just for a moment. Folks, I'm speaking with Natalie Mayo. She's a senior sales engineer with Datto, a Kaseya company. She came from an implementation manager background, has been in pre-sales for a couple of years now. And she was invited, frankly, because I was just so impressed with her and her background and her story. And she said, Chris, I never thought I'd be in sales. And here, not only am I in sales, but I love what I do and I love my profession. So, by the way, if you do have any comments or questions, please feel free to chime in. Natalie, I want to touch on something briefly that may be considered by some people to be a sensitive topic, but I
Mm.
think it's an important one for us to put
Sure.
out there,
Yeah.
and that is the fact that in many and within many of the groups that I work, there aren't a lot of women
Mm-hmm.
in represented in their profession or on their
Right.
team, and just as a profession,
Sure.
I think women are underrepresented. Having worked with your organization, I can proudly say, or happily say that's not necessarily the case. But I am curious to understand from your vantage point. And by the way, my
Yeah.
wife is in a similar situation. My wife
Yeah.
works for an Indian-based telecommunications company. So
Awesome.
she's like, Chris, I'm usually the only woman in most of the meetings that.
Yeah.
So do you mind talking for a minute about
Sure.
that and helping people like myself sort of understand
Sure.
maybe some of the unique challenges or or
Yeah.
or feelings that you might
Mm-hmm.
have in that
Mm-hmm.
context?
Yeah, definitely. So I think that this is not necessarily just with pre-sales. I think it's with, the tech field in general. Like,
Yeah.
when I was in the support side, I remember distinctly someone speaking to my manager at the time, no longer with the company, saying Natalie can't handle this particular product, despite the
Wow.
fact that, I trained that person at a previous company. So things like that. Um, I feel, in my current role, extremely supported. Chris Mabry, Jason Berg, Dan Knight, Frank Solano, my male friends and coworkers. That's great. But I do think some unique challenges are, I did some Googling, it might be incorrect, but I think the distribution of sales engineers, male to female, it's three quarters male and one quarter female. So it's improving.
Wow.
Um,
Yeah.
there are not a lot of women as SEs. And I think that part of that is there aren't as many women in tech. Um, I found that there are some prospects that I speak with, and it goes back to that sort of thing where you feel like you've done everything right. You've done the tone matching, you've shown them exactly what they want to see. And for whatever reason, they just don't like you, or they speak in a way that, could be perceived as negative. And that is rare, but it happens. I also feel, though this I believe has made me even more driven, that I've had to work a little harder, right? Maybe
Mm,
than some other people. And
mm,
that's not a universal truth for everyone. That could be unique to me, but
mm.
I felt that way for a lot of my career. What I found though is that when I'm doing, the vast majority of prospects that I'm demoing for are really stoked to have those in-depth technical demos from a woman. They think it's cool, because maybe it's a little more rare.
Mm.
So, and it's received, not, I don't know if that's the right way to say it, but tend to be received quite well.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Do you find that it feels different when your audience or your prospect is female, or there are women in your audience as opposed to all male audiences?
Um, Not necessarily. No. Sometimes, I think sometimes, but I wouldn't say necessarily. I think the vast majority of our partner base does tend to be male, and I think generally it's well received. And I think some of the those rare occasions where it's not, it's could be attributed to something else. But yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
yeah,
Well, just I appreciate your thoughts and your comments.
of
I know
course,
some of the
yeah.
best I know some of the best sales engineers that I've had the privilege of working with are
Mm-hmm.
women, and I
Mm-hmm.
do think
Agree.
I think women have that tend to have a natural empathy
Mm-hmm.
about them. I think there's just something in our DNA, and I
Right.
think that, well, and just the very first thing you said about how you enter every meeting trying to sort of get a read on
Mm-hmm.
people, and
Yeah.
there's a certain intuition there that I think is not as natural for some men. So
Mm-hmm.
I just think I would like to see that those ratios between
Right.
men and women certainly
Totally
level out a little
agree.
bit. And your point is well taken too, just in the technology field overall.
Yeah.
Now you mentioned the fact that your background was media
Media
and
studies. Yeah.
media studies,
Mm-hmm.
and yet you're now in a reasonably high tech. I mean,
Yep.
data is
Yeah.
reasonably high tech.
Yeah.
So was that journey, was it difficult in any way, or did you
Yeah.
find that you just liked the technology?
I did find that I just like the technology. And I think really when that started, sort of the knowledge of the fact that like this is a potential career path started in that startup home automation company that I worked for. Support, very underpaid. It was super fun. It's actually where I met my husband. Um, so he used to fly his drone over my desk, big open plan office. But we sold like home automation hubs to consumers, and part of
Hmm.
that was actually like you know rerouting like a DNS records, which we probably should never have been
Hmm.
doing, but it was very, very early. So like learning those things, picking them up on the fly, um, kind of piqued my interest. And then,
Interesting.
to the next job, Autotask, like that obviously is a professional services platform for managed service providers. You just absorb it. So I didn't find it difficult at all. I found that I wish I had known that I had that sort of
Hmm.
affinity so that I could have majored in, you know, computer science or something like that, right?
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
yeah.
Well, but I think honestly, I think that should be a word of encouragement for a lot of people
Hmm.
who did not study a
Right.
technology, or didn't study some sort of information technology major in
Hmm.
college, and yet there is a pathway into the pre-sales profession, and
Yes.
not just with a business
Right.
application or a business solution. I mean,
Absolutely.
here you are, you started out in home automation and then
Hmm.
got into the professional services, and now
Hmm.
a reasonably high tech
Yeah.
organization. So
Yeah.
I think that
Absolutely.
that should be a word of encouragement. By the way, Natalie, I don't know if you saw the note there. So Chris Pompilio, Chris, good to see you. He's actually going to be a guest here in a few weeks.
Awesome. Awesome.
So question for you, Natalie, coming from
Hmm.
implementations, what tips
Hmm.
do you have for staying at the high, or at a high level, and not falling back into support slash
Ooh,
training
training
mode?
mode. So I think one tip would be um, pausing a lot, right? So showing kind of
Mm,
everybody has a flow. We all have a talk track, but you got to mask that a little bit based on the discovery and then show what you anticipate would be most important. Pull back, say, how does this look? What are your thoughts, right?
that's
And
good.
then if there's something that you think you might want to show, for example, maybe like some sort of complex report related to profitability that you may think is super
Mm.
cool because you've built it out and you've seen the material, difference that it makes. Saying, would you like to see that? Is that of interest to you? Right. So the constant pausing and asking questions has helped me,
Love that. Yeah.
because it kind of like tempers the urge to blah, 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 you know. So yeah.
Well, and we, there's a term that I use in some of my programs. It's called check your six.
Mm.
And I don't know if you're
Hmm.
familiar with that term. As I understand, it's a pilot term. And pilots, when they're flying, if you
Yeah.
think of the clock, 12 o'clock is straight ahead and 6
Right.
o'clock is behind you. So
Right.
check your six is basically look over your back. And sort of that's, to me, that's sort of that pause, right?
Hmm.
Is to pause, check your six, check your back. Like let's sync up here. Let's touch base and
Sure.
make sure we're still tracking, right?
Right.
So
Right.
I think that's really good. Natalie, you're triggering some questions. You got another question from
Yeah.
Ricardo Alvarez.
Yeah.
As someone who doesn't have a technology background but finds themselves being pulled towards pre-sales or
Hmm.
more technical roles, any suggestion or advice on how to get started improving my understanding?
Yeah.
So, really good question, Ricardo. Thanks for asking. Natalie, any thoughts for Ricardo?
Yeah. That's an excellent question. I would say if that is a role that is within your organization, Ricardo, maybe shadow if possible, or take some time to
Mm,
link up with someone in that role, see what it's about. If you've already been, on those demos, um, get access to the product, right? And then play around with it. Um, I don't believe that every single sales engineer needs certifications. I think they can help. I only have two so far. I'm working on, expanding that, but it depends on what the product or the platform is that you're selling. So I
100%.
would say honing in on the core features and then doing research, right? Just like that natural curiosity, to understand the channel that you're working within, and then also the technology and a lot of like autodidactical, like self-teaching, right? That's what I would recommend. Yeah.
Really, really good. And David Nottingham chimed in. Take all the free training and webinars you can to
Yes,
gain knowledge. That's what it's well said, David.
absolutely. Yeah.
Well, and to your point, Natalie, the other thought that came to mind for me is I think we and my advice for Ricardo would be: do you want to be technical or do you want to be a sales engineer? Because you don't necessarily
Hmm.
have to be both. There
Exactly.
there are a number of sales engineers that work for companies that sell CRM or sell marketing
Right.
technology that
Right.
you don't necessarily have to be overly technical to
Right.
be in that role, right?
Exactly.
So
Exactly.
so I think that's really good advice.
Definitely.
Natalie, if you can believe it, we've already been at this for over
Wow.
40 minutes. I know the time flies very very
Yes.
very quickly,
Hmm.
doesn't it? What's I'm inspired to ask you. Yeah, join every developer program here. I'm inspired to ask you what and you may not know, but I'm
Hmm.
curious. What do you suppose is ahead for Natalie Mayo? Do you are you at a point where we're at this from this perspective, you're like, I just can't imagine doing anything else right now, and
Hmm.
I'm going to be a sales engineer as long as I can be a sales engineer? Or are you seeing that, okay, I think at some point I want to move into management. Some people move into
Hmm.
marketing. Some people
Hmm.
want to go, quote, further to the dark side and become an account executive. So have
Yeah.
you thought
Yeah.
about sort of, where your track may go?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. I think one of the good things is that at this company, there's a pretty solidified career model framework, thanks to Chris Mabry and others, that details kind of the way that you can move up. Right. I right now like being an individual contributor. I think senior solutions engineer, the next step would be potentially principal, right, for a
Mm,
particular product. I have absolutely thought about management. Um, I think that that would probably be my next move. However, there's a lot that goes into people management, and I almost worry that I would miss, what I'm doing day to day, right? I would miss
yeah,
the joy of the demo. So, thought about that. That's probably in my 5-year plan, moving up
yeah,
in
yeah.
pre-sales, yeah, from a leadership standpoint. Yep.
It's an insightful comment because the skills that and what I would call the natural talents and natural abilities that make
Mm.
someone, quote, a rock star sales engineer aren't exactly the same
Right.
skills. Some,
Yeah,
but there's definitely some different muscles we need to exercise to become
absolutely.
a, quote, rock star leader of people and
Right.
manager of people. So,
Right.
and it is an important decision for a lot of
Hmm.
people. So
Oh yeah.
I'm the first to admit I spent some time in management,
Sure.
and discovered that I'm better in front of people than
Yeah.
I am managing people.
Right.
So, there, I mean, and there's power in self awareness, right?
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
and that's why I asked you. So
Yeah.
I have a feeling that whatever you set your mind to, you can accomplish and will do very, very well. But
Thank
I
you.
was inspired to ask, is there anything else that you were hoping that we might have touched on, that either about this
Yeah.
profession,
Mhm.
about your journey, that maybe we haven't touched on?
Yeah. So I think we pretty much covered a lot here. I just think some advice, for anybody that might be watching. There's a lot of widespread misconceptions about sales as a whole, right? Especially if you're in a support or an implementation role. There's almost like this weird dichotomy of, oh, sales, and then if you're a support, we're really all working together. And it's, we
Mm,
talk about things in the framework of pre and post sales. Like sales drive every single business. So coming to
amen.
terms with that is important. And if
Mm.
there's any sort of curiosity about sales, explore it, because it's likely not what you think it is, if you are not currently in a sales role, or if it's post sales technically. Um, that's one thing that I guess some advice that I would give for sure.
Love that.
Yeah, cool.
I love that. It is interesting, and you may recall this either from my book or from my talk.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
thought sales was below me. I never thought I would be a sales professional. In fact, even after I made the switch into pre-sales, I didn't think of
Hmm.
myself as a sales professional, right? I
Right,
still thought of
right,
myself as the technical person. I thought,
right.
don't categorize me as a sales professional. I'm not one of
Hmm.
those people, right? Because I
Yeah,
had the wrong idea, or
exactly.
understanding of, I mean, what was my perspective of sales?
Right.
Used car sales
Hmm.
lot, right?
Hmm.
and
Hmm.
and so eh, and it took me a little while
Hmm.
come to peace with the fact that I was in sales.
Yeah.
And once I did, and now that I have, I sincerely believe that sales is a very noble profession.
Oh,
At at
absolutely.
at the end of the day, sales and selling is to solve, and selling is to
Right.
serve,
Exactly. It's
right?
solutions to problems. And again, it is the center, I think, of every business, right? So like is I don't think I would have said that 5 years ago, but like that's just the reality. Now that I'm
Mm.
in that world. So very grateful to be here and for everybody that, helped me along the way. And thank you for having me, Chris. It's been a pleasure.
You are quite welcome. Now, before I let you go, I am
Sure.
going to ask you one more question
Yeah.
that you may not see coming, if you're open to one more question.
Of course. Yeah.
Okay. If you could ask me one
Mm.
question, what might that be?
Ooh, that's a good one. Let's see. What is your what personality traits do you think lend to a successful pre-sales professional? If you could name a few.
Personality
It's probably a
traits.
tough one. Yeah,
Well, and my mind sort of bounces in so many different
I know.
directions.
Yeah.
You've used this word at least on more than one occasion just in this talk, and
Mm,
and that's the first thing that comes to mind is curiosity. Like
sure.
a sincere sense of curiosity is, I think one of the strongest traits. A few others, and frankly, I think you've mentioned a number of them. I think I think being a problem solver certainly is
Hmm.
is is
Yeah.
another one,
Yeah.
and being a people person. I,
Yeah.
I I think I know for me that's what largely drove me to even look. And I wasn't necessarily looking for pre-sales per se, but I
Sure.
knew I was unhappy in my profession,
Right.
largely because I spent about 80% of my time sitting behind a desk working
Hmm.
on architectures and architecture models and
Mm.
and data models, and I was
Hmm.
really good. I was a really good, if I may
Yeah.
say, I was a
Yeah.
really good data modeler and
Oh
a
yeah.
really good data architect, right?
Right.
But
Right.
I spent most of my time by myself in front of a computer, and
Hmm.
I had such a desire to interact with people and be
Yes.
in front of people, and so I'm going to give you a fourth, and that's a communicator. We are, I think, if you're a natural communicator,
Hmm.
then I just think so. There you go. So curiosity,
Yep.
problem solving.
Yep.
I don't
Communication.
remember. communication. I think there
People
was another one,
person,
but people person, and then
extrovert, whatever. Yeah.
communication.
Yeah.
I think those are some of the personality traits that
Cool.
and this is what I tell people all the time. Even if you're like for example, you're an implementation manager.
Mm-hmm.
If the part of your job that you like the most
Yeah.
is standing up in front of people or communicating with people,
Yeah.
presenting to people, or understanding their problems, understanding their challenges, if that's the
Mm-hmm.
part of the job that you like the most, man, that's a pretty good indication that you might be you're not only good in this role,
Right.
but very effective in this role.
Well
So,
said. Totally agree. Yeah.
all right, Natalie, you get
All
you
right.
final word. Any final thoughts from you?
I don't think so. Just thanks everyone, and it's been fun.
Well, you've been a delight. You're very articulate. You're an exemplary profile of what this role looks like. It's been a delight to have you on, folks. Thank you so much for joining. If you're catching the recording, I hope you enjoyed the conversation. By the way, David Nottingham, amen. Sales is a
Yes.
team
Team
sport.
sport. 100%. Yeah.
Well said. Natalie, hang around just for a minute. I'm gonna see you backstage. I'll give you your parting gift. To everybody else, have a good week. Have a good weekend, and we'll see you on the next Tech Sales Advice. Thanks all.
Bye.